It began on a cold evening, the kind of evening when the city streets fall silent, except for the whispers of the wind that slip through the cracks of forgotten buildings. Among the shadows of those streets lived Daniel, a man once full of dreams, now reduced to little more than a coat, a blanket, and the companionship of stray dogs. Life had dealt him blows he never imagined, stripping away his job, his family, and his dignity, until the pavement beneath his feet became his only home. Yet, despite all he had lost, a quiet kindness remained in his heart, something that kept him from giving up completely. That night, as Daniel walked past the alleys he knew so well, one of his dogs, a scrappy mutt named Rusty, began to bark furiously. Daniel followed the sound and froze when he saw a small figure lying against a dumpster. A child, barely breathing, with dirt on her face and fear in her eyes. She was trembling, whispering faintly for her mother. Daniel's heart raced. He had nothing, not even enough food for himself. Yet in that moment, he knew he couldn't walk away. Daniel lifted the girl gently, wrapping her in his blanket while Rusty kept guard. He tried to calm her, whispering promises that she would be safe now. He could have gone to the police, but the girl's faint words gave him a clue. Through broken breaths she said her mother's name. It was a name Daniel recognized well, not because he knew her, but because it was often printed across newspapers and television screens. A millionaire, one of the most powerful women in the city, untouchable and wealthy beyond measure. The kind of woman who would never notice someone like Daniel. Yet here was her daughter, fragile and lost, in the arms of a homeless man. With trembling hands, Daniel found a public payphone. He hadn't called anyone in years, but he remembered the number from seeing it once in the news. His voice cracked as he spoke into the receiver. "I saved your child," he said quietly. "She's with me. She's safe. You need to come now." On the other end, silence. Then a rush of disbelief and fear. The millionaire, Miss Thompson, had been searching endlessly for her daughter since she went missing that afternoon. She couldn't understand how a stranger, a man with nothing, had found her when all her security and resources had failed. But she didn't hesitate. Within minutes, cars screeched into the alley, lights blinding Daniel as women in suits rushed forward. Ms. Thompson herself ran from the car, her heels clicking against the pavement, her eyes filled with a desperation that stripped away all pride and power. She fell to her knees when she saw her daughter alive in Daniel's arms. "Mommy," the little girl whispered, reaching out weakly. Miss Thompson gathered her close, tears streaming down her face. And then, almost instinctively, she turned to Daniel. For the first time in years, someone looked at him not with disgust or pity, but with gratitude so deep it shook him. The story could have ended there, with Miss Thompson taking her daughter home and Daniel fading back into the darkness of the streets. But fate had different plans. In the days that followed, Miss Thompson couldn't stop thinking about the man who had saved her child. A man who had nothing, yet gave everything. While the world labeled Daniel as worthless, he had proven himself richer in spirit than many who lived in comfort. She reached out, finding Daniel again. At first, Daniel resisted, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. But Ms. Thompson's persistence broke through his walls. She offered him shelter, a job, a second chance. It wasn't charity. It was respect. Daniel had done what no amount of money could buy. He had shown courage, compassion, and humanity when it mattered most. Slowly Daniel's life began to change. He shaved, wore clean clothes, and started working at one of Miss Thompson's companies. But what mattered most was not the roof over his head or the paycheck in his hand. It was the dignity he had regained, the chance to feel like a man again. Rusty, his loyal dog, now slept on a warm bed instead of the cold streets, and Daniel could finally breathe without the weight of hopelessness pressing down on him. Yet the most profound transformation was not Daniel's alone. Miss Thompson, a woman who once measured life in profits and losses, began to see the world differently. She realized that wealth meant nothing if it couldn't be used to touch lives, to heal wounds, to lift others from the shadows. Her daughter's rescue had changed her, and Daniel had become not just a savior, but a friend, a reminder of what truly matters. The bond between the two grew stronger, built not on money or power, but on gratitude and respect. And as the years passed, Daniel would often tell his story, not to boast, but to remind others that heroes aren't always dressed in uniforms or standing on stages. Sometimes they are the forgotten souls, hidden in plain sight, who rise in the darkest moment to shine the brightest light. By the end of it all, the city no longer looked at Daniel as a homeless man. They saw him as a man who chose compassion over indifference, courage over fear. And for Ms. Thompson, every time she looked at her daughter, she remembered the night a stranger's call changed everything, not just for her family, but for two lives whose paths were never meant to cross, yet forever intertwined by one act of humanity. The story leaves behind a message that lingers. True wealth is not measured in what we keep, but in what we give, even when we have nothing left.